Hitting a muscle and stimulating a muscle are two very different things. And this is one of those details that can completely change the way you design your training. Because it's really easy to assume that just because you feel a muscle working in a lift, it must be getting built by that lift. It's true that compound exercises work multiple muscles at once. That's one of the big reasons they're so efficient. But does that mean they build all of them equally? Not at all. Let's take the deadlift as an example. It's a compound that often praised as king of the lifts besides squats because of how many muscles are involved. But when we break it down, it becomes obvious that it works better for growing some muscles than others. If we look at the prime movers, glutes take up about 40% of the load, quads maybe around 15%. Then there are the stabilizer muscles, your erector spinae, which is your mid back, at about 10%, hamstrings around 10%, adductor magnus, which is the big inner thigh muscle, around 5%, lats 5%, traps 5%, rhomboids 5% again, and then your core, abdominals and obliques at roughly 10%. Now, this data need not be taken at face value. From your personal experience, you might be able to gauge the differences, that there are certain muscle groups that are much more engaged. The deadlifts hit them a lot harder than the others. But this general distribution tells you something very important. While the deadlift involves all these muscles, the growth stimulus isn't equally spread out. Your glutes are getting a lot of direct work, your quads, not so much. Your lats, even less. Here's where this matters. Let's say you're trying to build bigger quads and you rely solely on deadlifts because you feel your quads working during them. You're going to hit a wall quickly. The stimulus just isn't strong enough to grow them significantly compared to an exercise where the quads are the main driver, like a squat or a leg press. The same principle applies in the opposite direction. Squats require a strong back to keep the bar stable and your torso upright. But that doesn't mean squats will build a strong, well developed back. In fact, if someone tried to eliminate all their direct back training and just relied on squats to grow it, they'd eventually plateau. In some cases, the back musculature might even regress. That's because being involved in a movement and being stimulated to grow are not the same thing. A muscle can be active in a lift without ever getting enough tension, volume, or range of motion to actually grow from it. So, what do you do with this information? First, recognize which muscles are prime movers in a lift and which ones are just assisting. That way, you don't accidentally think you're training a muscle effectively just because it's sore or because you can feel it. Second, learn to use your secondary muscles deliberately. In the squat, for example, most people think about pushing with their legs, but a stronger squat often comes from engaging the back and core more actively, pulling the bar into you, keeping the lats tight, bracing through the midsection. That requires proper warm up to activate those areas and a focus on technique cues that bring them into the movement rather than letting them just come along for the ride. Now, going back to deadlifts on their own, they're not the best hypertrophy tool for every muscle they touch, but that doesn't mean they aren't valuable. Far from it. Deadlifts bring a level of systemic benefit that isolated lifts simply can't. They make multiple muscle groups work together in a synergistic way that's more than the sum of their parts. They improve your neural output, which means you get stronger in other lifts, even ones you're not directly training. And while they may not max out growth in every muscle, they are excellent for glutes, traps, and even forearms. That brings us to the bigger picture. Why compound lifts and basic movement patterns should form the foundation of training if you want a maximum carryover. In the real world, you rarely deal with perfectly balanced, perfectly stable weights. Think about carrying a heavy suitcase or picking up a sandbag or moving furniture. Those objects are awkward, unstable, and they shift as you lift them. They place high demands on your stabilizers. So why don't we just train with awkward objects all the time? After all, aren't they functional? Because for building strength and muscle efficiently, you actually want to minimize some of those stability demands so you can focus on loading the target muscles more heavily and safely. That's where the barbell comes in, by keeping the movement mostly in the sagittal plane and reducing unwanted instability. It lets you focus on strength and muscular adaptation. Odd objects still have their place. Athletes and strongman competitors use them to build real world strength and coordination. But if your goal is maximum muscle growth and efficient strength training, compounds like squats, deadlifts, presses, and rows should be your staples. Then you use accessories to fill in the muscles that compounds only hit but don't fully stimulate. So, to wrap this up, don't confuse muscle involvement with muscle growth stimulus. Know the difference, program accordingly, and you'll make much faster progress without falling into the trap of thinking one lift will do everything.